So I'm gonna start this off by taking back what I said. If you guys check out a few videos ago, I did review the Seiko Batman, and I did say that that was my favorite Seiko they've ever released. But actually, the watch I'm gonna be showcasing to you guys today is my absolute favorite, and I don't think any Seiko could trump this one. But guys, before we get on with this review, make sure you check out exquisitetimepieces.com. If you're interested in this watch or any other Seiko out there, they're also an authorized dealer for Grail Seiko, Blancpain, Breguet, and many other brands, so make sure you check them out and let them know that I heard about them from this channel. If you're interested in any of their watches, if you let them know that you heard about them from this channel, they'll hook you up over there at Exquisite Timepieces. But guys, let's check out the Seiko Dark Knight. In 2019, Seiko released some of their best sports watches to prove to the world that, although they do make great watches in the affordable segment, they can create sports watches that have a seat next to the greats like Rolex and Omega. In fact, judging by their first model we took a look at, the SNR027, also known as the Batman, Seiko created overbuilt sports watches, making them some of the best modern Seikos in current production. Now, when Seiko added these watches to their prospects line, they had a theme in mind: sky, land, and sea. We already had an in-depth hands-on review with the sky model, which I'm sure we can all agree that Seiko absolutely crushed that model, aside from perhaps the size, which could be a positive or a negative for you, depending on your wrist size or preference. Now today we're going to be taking a closer look at the Landmaster, also known as the Dark Knight. Still a GMT watch similar to the 033, but instead of a 24-hour bezel, we get a blackout compass, so we're going to talk about that later. So I am going to repeat myself from that previous video. However, this is very important to note when you're looking at these watches, but Seiko reserves their serious tool watches for their prospects line. You may be wondering, how serious are these? Well, should this have a Grand Seiko stamp on it, it would have given Rolex and Omega a run for their money. In fact, even without handling the watch in the metal, you would only have to look at the GPHG to see that Seiko's Prospect LX, specifically their divers version, actually won the overall prize for the divers category against major competition. Now keep in mind that the GPHG is an extremely difficult competition with some of the hardest judges to please. I won't sugarcoat it. It is hard to understand why Seiko would cost this much until you see it in the metal, and rather than going on and on about why I think this watch needs your attention, I'm just gonna go ahead and tell you gotta see it in the metal to completely understand it. Okay, so now that we've gotten a chance to understand why these watches are the best modern Seikos in production, allow me to explain myself why the Landmaster, specifically the blacked out version, is my favorite. The answer is quite simple: design. If there's one thing I've learned to appreciate in many years of collecting, is the art of creating simple watches and making them look extremely special, like Alangan Zuna's Saxonia Thin, and on the opposite side of the spectrum, creating complicated looking pieces look harmonious and perfectly symmetrical. Now in this case, we're taking a look at the Landmaster. Having a GMT function, a power reserve, and a compass is quite the task for a designer to make a watch look symmetrical and comfortable for the eyes to look at. Seiko did a fantastic job with this, though I really wish the power reserve indicator wasn't there. It doesn't bother me as much as it gives it a nice tooly functional aesthetic, but it would have looked a lot better in my opinion without it. Now since we're on the topic of negatives, let me get this out of the way. As of late, I've been trying my best to be more responsible by avoiding blanket statements such as the watch is too small or the watch is too big. Let's face it, some have smaller wrists, some have larger wrists, some prefer smaller watches, and others like big watches that have a wrist presence. I do have my preferences, but while still trying to learn this YouTube thing, as a one-man show, I want to be fair with my assessment. The watch is in fact on the bigger side, whether or not that is a positive for you or a negative. Now the blacked out version definitely gives the impression that the watch is a lot smaller than the specs may suggest, but here's what you need to know. The watch comes in at 44.8mm across with 15.7mm thickness, but one of the biggest concerns when it comes to bigger or smaller watches should be the lug-to-lug size, which means from top to bottom, as a deciding factor of how it will actually fit on your wrist. In this case, the watch comes in at approximately 50mm from top to bottom, and while that isn't the most universally versatile size, it should fit most wrists just fine. Now, the watch is also incredibly light. If you're someone who has smaller wrists but likes bigger watches, this will be quite comfortable, and the reason is because this watch is made out of fully titanium, and something to note, they do use a hard coating, making this more scratch resistant than regular titanium watches. Now, for those of you with a keen eye, you may have noticed something with the seconds hand. It's gliding so smoothly, almost as if there's a spring drive caliber powering this watch. Surely not, right? This is a Seiko, and typically we expect spring drive movements from Grail Seiko, but we don't really expect it from a Seiko. To be honest, the debate of whether or not both brands should be using the same movement deserves its own video. But yes, this one does have a spring drive movement, but there is a catch. This isn't exactly the same spring drive you get with Grail Seiko. In a nutshell, you get a less decorated, but equally as accurate 5R66 caliber, and in this case with a closed caseback, so honestly, who cares? You still get an incredibly accurate movement at plus or minus 1 second per day with a 72-hour power reserve, a GMT function, and the most satisfying glide you will get on a seconds hand on any watch on the market. If you haven't seen spring drive in the metal, you really have to. Now finally, you get a double anti-reflective coating on the crystal, making it look like there isn't any crystal at all. That's one thing I kind of hate every time I see this. When I look at my Submariner and I see no anti-reflective coating at all, it actually makes me a bit sad. But the last thing you need to know is this watch has 200 meters of water resistance in case you decide to go diving. You just need to change that strap because this one does not have a rubber strap. So in my opinion, this is the best Seiko in modern production, and personally the blacked out Landmaster is my absolute favorite. I don't think there's anything I would change about this watch except perhaps remove that power reserve indicator. This is one of the best Seikos in modern production, and honestly it's very hard to beat this one. But as always guys, please let us know in the comment section below what you think about the Landmaster. Do you like it? What don't you like about it? Let us know in the comment section below. Also, make sure you visit exquisitetimepieces.com if you're interested in this watch or any other Seiko. They'll hook you up over there at exquisitetimepieces.com, especially if you mention that you heard about them from Watch Collecting Strategy. They're gonna hook you up over there at Exquisite Timepieces. Guys, thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you in the next one.